Hello everyone, welcome to Fishin, the podcast where we discuss Legacy's most competitive tribe and help the whole community become better Merfolk players. I'm Kody, one of the co-hosts of the show, and not Kody Smith on Twitter. And we also have this week a special guest host, Tuxdev. How you doing, Tux?
Doing pretty well.
Awesome, we're glad to have you on the show. Where can we find you on the interwebs?
I am on Twitter @_Tuxdev, and also on Twitch @Tuxdev. And mostly I hang out on Discord more than anything else.
Yeah, the Merfolk Discord is a great place to discuss basically what we're going to be discussing today. Just as a heads up, Matt had a small family emergency. He wished he could be here, but family comes first, so we're not going to push him into recording. And Tux was very gracious and stepped up to the call when I asked if he was available. So yeah, thank you so much, Tux, for stopping by the show, and it's great to have you on.
It's great to be on.
All right, and you can remember to share the show with your friends. If you have a Merfolk player at your local game store, make sure to share it with them. Support the show by rating the show on iTunes or Google Play, and checking out our stream at twitch.tv/fishcastmtg. We also actually mirror your stream, so Tux, whenever you're on, it should pop up on ours as well. So hopefully that's bringing in a few more people at least.
Other hosting is magical.
It really is, and there really isn't. I mean, you're kind of the only legacy streamer, legacy Merfolk streamer rather, out there. So it's really good to try and get that out as much as we can. We want as many, because we'll get into it later. But you're pretty much the only one. So yeah, it's great. It's great to have you on and great to get you going here. We have a new patron this week, and it is Luke S. So thank you so much, Luke, for becoming a patron, and he picked the random Merfolk of the week. And he picked random Merfolk number 1. Hey, Tux, do you want to read the card for us today?
Sure. Air Bladder. Costs 1 blue. Just a blue. Not actually a Merfolk, it's an enchant creature. This is way back before when Oz wasn't a concept yet, and it was literally enchant creature. Enchanted creature has flying. Enchanted creature can't block only creatures with flying. So the reason why it's like a Merfolk-ish card is, of course, the flavor text. Random mutations among root water Merfolk were common and disturbing. So yeah, this card is literally just puts the Stormbound Geist like text on a creature.
Yeah. And the art also shows a pretty messed up Merfolk there with the giant.
Yeah, the art is real gnarly, and also that eagle just like whoop.
Yeah. Well, see, the rootbound Merfolk were made when Wrath was overlaid on Dominaria, and so that's kind of where they're kind of tainted by they're like Phyrexian Merfolk kind of. So that's why they look all messed up and kind of like have like weird like red tints to them, as opposed to like the goldish, golden blues that we see in the Dominarian Merfolk.
Right, and it's also where we get like Rootwater Hunter, the Merfolk Goblin Pinga dude. I actually played him once.
As a joke?
No, not as a joke. Like I was actually trying to metagame someone, and needed a Pinga effect, or thought I needed a Pinga effect.
Well, hopefully that.
Yeah, this card's not actually playable like anywhere. It's just flatly worse than Flight.
Yeah, I mean, it turns it off as a blocker. Except for against flying creatures, it's just very narrow. I mean, this is definitely not something I would be looking to slide into any version of Merfolk.
Yeah. Also, it costs 1, which is a mild problem when looking at any card. It always has to consider: is this 1-drop worth it? Am I expected to play this before Chalice?
Yeah, and often that's not the case, and especially when we're coming in with Legacy, we make an exception for Aether Vial. Really,
make an exception for Aether Vial. We also make an exception for like super game-ending 1-drops like Relic and Grafdigger's Cage, but this is not Grafdigger's Cage.
No, this is definitely not on the same power level as Grafdigger's Cage, for sure. All right, so we're first off, we're gonna start off by asking you a few questions, Tux, because we want to get to know you a little bit, and I know that most people in the Merfolk community kind of know who you are, just from kind of lurking around in the various places that Merfolk lurk around, and but there are some people that may not have heard of you, so I wanted to ask you a few questions. When did you start playing Magic, Tux?
I started playing Magic in 2010. Rise of Eldrazi like just got released.
All right. I mean, did you play like limited, or were you like a standard player at first?
I was playing standard at first. I was playing a lot of standard at first. I actually learned Magic a few years before at a board gaming club at my university, but I wasn't like actually like actively playing the game. I was just like fooling around with decks that people had.
Oh, okay.
But I actually like started really playing Magic and like having my own decks and stuff at Rise of Eldrazi.
So Rise of the Eldrazi, I mean that's kind of like when Modern was coming out, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
It came out a little bit after that, yeah.
Okay. So I mean, obviously, if you were, when did you start playing Merfolk?
I started playing Merfolk a little bit before True Name Nemesis got released. My initial deck did not have True Name Nemesis in it, but like 3 months or so later, it did. So not sure when that was exactly.
True Name Nemesis was Commander 2014, I believe. That was the
Somewhere in there.
yeah. And so were you playing Legacy then, or were you playing
Yeah, I
Modern Merfolk?
started playing Merfolk at Legacy. My someone basically said like, "Hey, you should play Legacy." I'm like, "Okay, what deck should I play?" A few years earlier, someone like set up a playtesting group before GP, and I had no idea about Legacy then. I was like, "Let's play Legacy." I'm like, "Okay, cool." And they handed me a proxy Merfolk deck because it was like like relatively easy to grok what the deck does. Um, and so I played it then. And so when someone else like suggested I should start playing Legacy, I was like, okay, I want to play Force of Will. I don't own dual lands. I at the time anyway. What should I play? And there's this nice convenient flowchart on the like Legacy Reddit and like the other interwebs where it's like, okay, I want to play Legacy. I want to play Force of Will. I don't have dual lands. Merfolk.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun. I mean, I've been playing Legacy Merfolk for uh, probably roughly a year now in paper, and it's definitely a lot of fun. It's a fun deck, and again, it has all those attributes. I mean, even the professor kind of touts Merfolk in Legacy for that reason. Is you don't need dual lands. The most expensive card is basically Force of Will, at least in paper. I mean,
Right.
Cavern is kind of creeping up there, but
Cavern's, I think, actually higher than Force Will nowadays, but that's a lot because of the Force Will reprint. Um, Whereas Cavern more or less didn't get reprinted. Like, sure, it's a mythic and iconic, but that doesn't really change supply that much.
yeah, I mean that you're right. That kind of, I mean, it dipped it down for a very short period, but definitely not enough for it to be like a meaningful reprint. But yeah, I mean, like it's a easy deck to port from Modern to Legacy as well. So that's definitely kind of a cool aspect. And also the gameplay is kind of similar, wouldn't you say?
The gameplay is similar-ish. The Legacy version leans very hard on Chalice of the Void, which makes it play more like a stompy deck, whereas the modern version still plays more like a tempo deck. Um, and that makes a pretty big difference in how it plays.
So I mean, you started playing Legacy a little bit before True Name Nemesis, like you said. What was the kind of the pushing over point for you to say like True Name Nemesis is a good enough card for Legacy Merfolk?
Oh, I played it like week one.
Oh, okay. So then
I
what?
started playing 2 copies week one, and then realized like how ridiculously silly it was as time went on, and added like a third copy, then the fourth copy, and then like then Phantasmal Image like started in the deck as like a 2 of, and then also just went up and up until it's like 4 and 4. I want to play all the true names.
Yeah, having copies 4 through 8 of True Name Nemesis is actually very sweet. It's a great feeling to just know that you can rip out, you know, eight almost a, you know, a sixth of your deck and play
Oh
True Name
yeah.
Nemesis. It's great.
Oh yeah, like True Name like changes the matchups. So like before True Name was printed, Goyf was like a really big problem because it was frequently way bigger than anything else. Like my board just couldn't deal with a Tarmogoyf effectively. And after True Name, it's like Tarmogoyf doesn't even matter anymore. I just block it all day.
And now Termaglyph is a $50 card. and Fringe played in Modern,
Yeah.
if that. So I mean, so what got you into streaming? I mean, I know that you've made you probably played on MTGO for some time before streaming. Is that correct?
A little bit, yeah. I started playing Standard in MTGO about the Theros Ravnica period. Return to Ravnica Theros. I was playing
Mm-hmm.
Standard. I realized that was not the greatest idea. I had Merfolk on MTGO. I sold out Standard and bought into Modern Merfolk. I had that for a while, played it a little bit. Tried a lot of different builds. Decided to stick with a build with Disrupting Shoal and Chalices, because
Nice.
I realized that the closer my deck resembled the Legacy deck, the better off I was like doing, because the play plans were like the most similar.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then so yeah, like the short like somewhere in the EMA Eternal Masters got announced and released.
Mm-hmm.
So Force of Wills went down from like being an $80 card like in paper to like a $30 card, $25 $30 card. So I picked up my place of Forces, uh, finished off like what I needed for Legacy on MTGO,
Mm-hmm.
and then saw that there was like nobody streaming Merfolk, and I was like, I'm going to spend every morning playing a League of Merfolk. I have an internet connection that can barely handle streaming. I'll just stream it because I'm gonna do this anyway. I can let other people watch me play instead of just doing it by myself. So it was more like a why. It's not like why do I stream? It's more why not.
Yeah, because you're also getting kind of like people discussing like lines of play with you, and so like that can kind of help you become a better player because you know you don't always see what is obvious in front of you, and
Yeah, like I only see a certain number of lines, and the chat can see some other number of lines. Though usually I play too fast for the chat to actually catch up.
the same.
Um,
I feel bad when you show up in my chat and I'm like, all right, I'm doing this and then this and then this, and then I just see no. No, lead with
like
this.
I'm like really fast on MTGO because, well, you kind of have to be sometimes. I don't have that much time to devote to it. Like my typical league run is about an hour and a half, which is extremely fast, really. Like most like in paper rounds of 50 minutes. Like you expect to spend an hour every round playing Magic, whereas I do like 5 rounds of Magic in an hour and a half. Leagues were when they introduced leagues, it was like the best thing ever. That like really propelled my streaming.
Yeah, because you didn't have to wait for the previous matches to slow down. I remember when that came out. I remember
Yeah,
like
it's like
a lot of people were like about leagues, but then basically once people started playing with them, like you're talking about, everybody turned their minds around.
yep. Yeah, especially for someone like me, where like I spend 20 minutes on a game on a full match, like 25 minutes on a full match, and so I'm just sitting there waiting 25 minutes for the Miracles players to finish the rounds of Magic. I'm like, well, now what do I do for 25 minutes?
Yeah.
Especially painful when streaming because like you're literally waiting on stream for 25 minutes, and I really don't like double queuing at all.
Oh, it's
Like
the
even
worst.
risking the double queue, like even starting another like 2-man queue for like double and like risking the double queue is like just awful.
Yeah. No, I
So
know what you
like
mean.
I'm just sitting there for 25 minutes while I'm doing nothing, the stream's doing nothing, the stream's just waiting. Like my stream viewers just sitting around waiting. And that was like super bad.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Like when I watched like LSV stream and he like double or triple queues, like I have no patience for that. Like I can't go between games like that.
Yeah.
Not saying that it's not impossible, but you know, it's just one of those things that I don't like doing it myself because then it gives me I have a hard time you know, keeping track of where I am. But at the same, like you said, if you're streaming and you're just kind of sitting around waiting for a game, then you might have a quick game in your league, but then a long game in your double queue, and then you're just kind of out of luck.
Mhm. Yeah, so that's the reason why I don't really play in the challenges.
Yeah,
Is because it still has that structure of you have to wait until the round ends, and the miracles players are going to take 15 minutes, probably.
yeah. Or the like my games the other night where it was I played against that red Stompy deck, and I literally timed my opponent out.
Yeah, yeah, that was significantly because of mistakes they did in game one.
Oh, they
That
made so many mistakes. It was beautiful. If you haven't,
yeah,
if
that game one you should have died like 10 tons earlier probably.
Oh yeah, they could have swung out and just totally beat me up. But if you haven't checked out that game, I highly recommend it. Go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/fishcastmtg. You can watch. I have the games all separated out. The game 5 is a funny game. You can't read the chat because my chat wasn't working, but that was just such an odd game of Magic. I've never beaten an opponent by timing them out before, and I didn't
It's a
think that would.
legitimate strategy on MTGO. The clock is a part of the game, and you need to be aware of it. It usually doesn't matter to me personally that much because I play as quickly as I do, so I'm like always super way ahead on the clock, and they're like and my opponent's usually never in any like risk of timing out.
Yeah, but just my opponent in that matchup was kind of spinning their wheels when they shouldn't have, and they should have just put the pedal to the metal and
Oh
you
yeah.
know put me out of my misery. But anyway, so I kind of want to go over your list here real quick. I mean, because I mean and I don't mean this in a bad way, but you have a fairly stock you know, legacy Merfolk, and in legacy decks don't shift as much as they do in modern, where things can kind of come in or out pretty easily.
Right. I
To
consider all but like 4 slots as absolute locks in this current list.
Yeah, and on top of this list, Tux also has pinned to the top of the Merfolk Legacy Discord room. He has a walkthrough guide of Legacy Merfolk. So if you're so inclined, make sure to go check that out because it was incredibly helpful for me to just read over it, and it talks about, you know, why certain cards might be good in certain situations, and so there's lots of things to consider in the deck. I mean, the creature package is pretty standard, and again, most of this is modern legal. So if you buy Legacy Merfolk, you're like maybe $100 off of modern Merfolk, right?
Yeah, I bought Legacy Mofolk, and then when Modern started to become a thing in locally, I was like, I can play Modern. All I need to do is buy some Master Waves, and I'm playing Modern now.
Yeah, I think you're missing like Master Wave, Spreading Seas, Mirror Regery if you're that kind of Merfolk player. It's basically the whole of modern Merfolk as well. So we have 4 of Curse Catchers, which is a one of that is played in Legacy, but it's not played in modern very much anymore, right?
Yeah, Modern suffers nowadays from Coast Catcher just not doing as much. And there's a lot of like experimentation of what to do about that. But in Legacy, it's a slam dunk. Like there's so many decks in Legacy that that aren't especially creature based, like Storm, Reanimator, that you really want a way to interact that's pretty early and is also a creature.
Yeah, and then we also have obviously Lord of Atlantis, Master of the Pearl Trident, and Silver Go Adept, which are all modern mainstays. 4 of True Name Nemesis, just an all-star in Legacy in pretty much any deck that it's ever been a part of. And honestly, I think it's the card that I side out the least in Legacy Merfolk.
The card I side out at the absolute least, in that I never, ever, ever, ever side out, is Best Fish, otherwise known as Silver Go Adept. True Name I actually side out a fair bit. True Name is not very good against the unfair decks, where him being like untargetable and unblockable doesn't really matter very much because they don't have anything on the board anyway.
Yeah. No, I understand what you mean. Like basically the free win decks, like it's their decks like Reanimator, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. But basically decks that if they have the correct number of cards in hand, they basically win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the hard combo decks. But anything that's like super creature based, True Name's just a house.
And rounding out the creature package is Phantasmal Image. Again, this is can be a Silver Go Adept, it can be a Lord, it can be a Curse Catcher, it can be a True Name. Basically, and it could be anything your opponents have, which is really great for like Reanimator, for Sneak and Show. There's just lots of decks that Phantasmal Image is just great at, and even though it has that downside of being an illusion, it's worth it still. It costs 2. It uses up your brown mana effectively, and that's pretty much it. There's nothing to say. Nothing to see here.
Phantasmal Image is actually my personal favorite card in the deck. That's the reason why I use Phantasmal as my like I eventually I might get a webcam for my stream, but right now there's a Phantasmal Image sitting in that slot.
Yeah, I do like that. That's Phantasmal Image is a great Magic card for sure. We have 4 of Force of Will because Force of Will, and 1 of Echoing Truth. Echoing Truth is just kind of there's a lot of decks that can kind of lock you out, or like decks that go wide like Elves, and so having that 1 of Silver Bullet to just kind of make it so that you don't lose those games on the spot is kind of really great.
Yep. That 1 of Echoing Truth didn't exist from the beginning, but a local lands player was like being me way more often than I really liked to be. So I was like, okay, I want to kind of pre-board against lands, but I don't want to pre-board very hard against lands. Oh, I bring in Echoing Truth against lands, and it's got some utility against other things. So I started main decking the 1 of Echoing Truth. Just so I have like a slight pre-board against lands. And then I realized I was playing it more and more that it's just relevant against almost everything.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I run 1 of as well, and it's just good to have, because if there's a deck that slams like an Ensnaring Bridge, and then they get greedy and slam a second Ensnaring Bridge, then you can just really get them and just kind of turn them off for a second. And so moving on to the lands, we have 4 of Cavernous Souls, and you're running 3 of Mutavault, so not the full 4.
So the reason for this is that you have to play 11 basic islands. If you play less than 11 basic islands, you start caring about things like your opponent's wastelands and Blood Moon. I did an experiment with the card Warping Whale, which has a colorless mana cost to it, so you need a certain number of colorless lands. At that point, I was playing 10 islands. And for a while, it was like working okay-ish. But then I was playing against some Miracles decks and such with Blood Moons in them. And I suddenly ended up like looking at my hand, staring at the Blood Moon on the other side of the table, and thinking to myself, why do I care about Blood Moon suddenly? I'm not supposed to care about Blood Moon. And so I've determined that you have to play at least 11 basic islands in order to have a properly stable mana base.
Yeah,
and so because that you have 9 non-basic slots, 4 of those is a Slam Dunk Cavern. A lot of that is because of the chalices later on. You have to play 4 caverns. They're just like one of the best lands ever. Is a reason for a lot of a great blue matchup. And so you only have 5 slots left for non-basics. Right now I'm using it for 3 Mutavaults, 2 Wastelands. Before Deathrite got banned, it was 4 Mutavaults and 1 Gemstone Caverns because Deathrite made Wasteland look really, really silly to
Yeah.
have in your deck. Like, actively bad to have in your deck.
Yeah,
Whereas Gemstone gave me a little bit of extra tempo sometimes.
yeah, no, and that kind of allows for on the draw, or sorry, yeah, on the draw you could have a turn 1 Chalice game 2,
Yep.
or if you're on the draw for game 1, that gives you the option to have that. I don't have any Wastelands on Moto, so I haven't started running them, but I do agree that because of that Deathrite Shaman banning, it's the way has been cleared. We can play Wasteland now, and there's no problems with that.
Yeah, it's only 2 Wastelands because unlike Rug Delver, which has like 4 Wastelands and 4 Stifles, denying mana is not really the strategy of the deck. The Wasteland's really there as a surgical tool for important utility lands on the other side of the table, like Glacial Chasm or like Dark Depths combo, uh, or Grow with the Bone Willows, but it's not really there to just like get them off colors or generally like make them not play Magic.
Yeah, it's just this that I mean, that's kind of to me what Legacy Merfolk is about is slowing down the other decks to our speed. And so,
Yes.
like you said, you're not trying to like, oh, I'm gonna get them, I'm gonna cut them off of blue, you know, or anything like that. Like
No.
you're like, no, you instant win decks, you're not instant winning anymore. You have to play out this game.
Generally, we don't want to cut them off of blue because then our stuff's not unblockable anymore. But hey,
Well, yeah, I that was just the first example that came off the top of my head, but
yeah.
you know what I mean. Like we're not. I mean, that can happen, but it's not quite as often because of the dual lands. All right, so then onto the artifacts. We have 4 of Aether Vial because it's Aether Vial, and this is a Force of Will format, so we need ways to have number 1 to put in our creatures instant speed, and then also uncounterable.
Yes. Aether Vial is very, very good. It's a way to get back tempo, from in the Legacy format as a whole. Because if you look at the list, the median mana cost of the deck is 2. Um, most blue Legacy decks in general, the blue ones specifically, the spells cost about 1.5 mana. Because the cantrip like adds mana to like the next spell you play when you find with it, so it's not quite like a full step behind, but our deck basically functions a half ton slower than the entire format, and Aether Vial helps us like get that tempo back, so we're like actually competing on the same level of tempo.
Speaking of getting ourselves back on tempo with our opponents, Chalice of the Void.
Yeah, Chalice of the Void slows the game down immensely. Mostly, it's that almost everyone plays a giant, way too many 1-drops. We don't. We play like no 1-drops.
We play Curse Catcher and Aether Vial.
Yep.
And one drop in the sideboard that I want to talk about, but for the most part, our deck is vastly not affected by playing a Chalice on 1, whereas other decks that play Ponder, Preordained Brainstorms are definitely in trouble, or maybe not in trouble, but they're severely handicapped.
Very severely handicapped. It's often a 4-for-1, depending on what kind of deck they're playing.
Mm-hmm. And then 3 of Smuggler's Copter. I generally am a fan of 2, but I mean, I totally see a reason for 3. It's a great card.
Oh yeah, I love Smuggler's Copter. It fixes a lot of the issues with Merfolk. Merfolk is fundamentally a Stompy style deck. One of the classic issues with Stompy style deck, Eldrazi shares this, is that you're just living on the top of your deck, like off your top decks. If you don't have good top decks, you're gonna die. Smuggler's Copter helps with that a lot by giving us 2 draws per turn. So we're not living off just the top of our deck. We can filter through our deck a lot faster, find the critical cards we need to win the game.
Mm-hmm.
It also flies, which is very critical because sometimes we don't have island walk, and unlike modern, we're not playing anything in this list that just hands an island to our opponent. We just sort of assume its legacy is so very blue that they're just going to have an island anyway most of the time, or enough of the time. Whereas like against like Death and Taxes or Elves, where you really want to do some damage, Smuggler's Copter does that damage.
Yeah, and as you said, it kind of filters draws, so we can get rid of extra lands that are sitting in our hands. Because I mean, obviously, past 4 lands, we're not hurting for islands or anything really. So a lot of times, if you have spare islands in your hand, you can pitch them for something that you can actually use, like maybe a late game Curse Catcher could be better as something to pitch to Force of Will. So
Yep.
that's something to kind of consider, is just keeping track of what's in your hand to maybe not play that 7th land, like if you have a Smuggler's Copter in play.
Right. Actually, the most important pitch is not so much lands, because we have useful lands. But Ether Vials. Late Ether Vials after the Chalice of the Void for 1 is already on the table. In previous versions before the Copter, when you draw the Vial with a Chalice on the table, it's just sitting in your hand forever. It does nothing. You can't do anything with it. It's just there. Whereas Copter, now we can cash that useless card in for something hopefully useful.
Well, yeah, and the reason I chose Curse Catcher was again because of Chalice of the Void. I mean, once you have a Chalice down, a Curse Catcher is nothing, but it's
Not quite, because we do play Cavern of
oh,
Souls,
you're right,
and
you're right.
it's something I do quite often actually, is Cavern Cuss Catchers through the Chalice.
And I've done that before, so I don't know why I didn't think of that. This is why we have you on the show today, because you can tell us, you can tell me, you can correct me on the fly,
E-
but
Even though I do that a decent amount, like it's still like a thing where late Cuss Catchers, you all often better off just holding it in your hand, because it is a 1-drop and has the general weakness of a 1-drop not really being very impactful in the late game. Whereas like having the Force pitch is a lot, like if you draw a Force later, you'd rather have a Curse Catcher in your hand than on the table.
yeah, I mean a 3/3 is great, but but have you tried Force of Will? All right, so sideboard, real quick, we have Back to Basics. Just a great. I mean, this card's kind of shot up recently, but it's a great Punisher for basically non-monocolor decks. I mean, for 4-color loam, for lands, for pretty much most decks in the format, most 3-color decks. I mean, this is just a
Yep.
hoser.
Yeah, it doesn't completely hose both decks anymore because they are respecting Back to Basics, but if we can cut them off of a lot of mana, it's still very good for us. Like Back to Basics and Chalice have this cool duality where if you have both on the table, like the Back to Basics makes it so that they can't cast spells with they don't have the mana to cast those spells, and Chalice specifically protects the Back to Basics from Pyroblast, so they can't get out of the situation that easily.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. But yeah, Back to Basics is super strong. I don't see it coming out of the sideboard anytime soon. You're right that people are respecting it a lot more because they don't have Deathrite Shaman to make extra colors. But that doesn't mean that they're gonna stop playing their dual lands.
Absolutely not. They like a lot of the decks, even if they do respect it, are very color intensive, and so if you force them to respect Back to Basics, their game plan is hampered because they just have a giant pile of basics and can't cast all the spells they actually want to cast in a ton.
And most decks don't run so many basics per fetches. So it's one of those things that especially if they have a bunch of basics in hand, then when they play their fetches are basically useless. I mean, because
Yeah,
they'll get a dual land and they can tap it once, but that's it.
I have a Stoneblade deck in paper, and I play 6 basics in it, which is quite a lot of basics for a 3-color deck. Um, and even then, like Back to Basics is pretty effective because things like I can't just when Back to Basics is in play, I can't use Academy Ruins. And Academy Ruins is one of the more important cards in the Stoneblade list that runs it. in combination with the engineered explosives, because that's just like a straight lock late enough in the game.
Yeah, and like you said, decks that have lots of utility lands, like lands or that sort of thing. You know, once they tap their Grove of the Burn Willows and they can't untap with it, I mean, that's like, I don't know what they do. You know?
Oh yeah, that what they do is they do lots of crazy shenanigans with Glacial Chasm to shove the lands into the graveyard, loam them back, and try to make a functional mana base.
Well, yeah, but that's not like a
this
win.
is something that happened at GP Santa Ana, where I was playing against lands, and I had Back to Basics on the table and some other stuff. The important one was Back to Basics. And he had like a Mox Diamond and a Forest, so he could like play a little bit of Magic, but he couldn't play enough Magic. Like he had to spend so many of his resources just trying to get a functional mana base going that I was able to take that game.
Yeah, that's fair. It just like you said, it just hampers them. It's not about shutting them off. It's about making it so that they have to really think about their plays. So then we have 2 Dismembers, which are pretty bread and butter. If you play Modern Merfolk, this shouldn't be a surprise. Dismember is a good card. Kills lots of things in the format.
The most important sideboard card against Death and Taxes. The absolute most important sideboard.
I totally agree. Because those taxing effects are definitely pretty painful. And especially once they have a Batter Skull in play, then you just dismember and don't have to worry about it.
Well, Not really the Battle Skull that's the problem. It's the whatever is equipped with Sword and Fire and Ice. Dismember can, like, it takes 2 mana to play the Stoneforge Mystic, 2 mana to bring in the Sword and Fire and Ice, and 2 mana to equip it. If they don't have a mob in play and they only play 4 of them and not necessarily have it, that's 6 whole mana they're spending to make an attack with Sword of Fire and Ice. You negate that attack and kill the creature for 1 mana. That kind of tempo advantage is game winning. It's an incredibly high blowout.
Oh yeah, and like you said, they've spent so much mana on that turn that it's kind of like, I mean, not that they'll stop, not that they'll not want to keep playing, but it is definitely a turning point in the game.
Yep.
You have another Echoing Truth to match the one in the main. We've already talked about Echoing Truth pretty extensively. Flusterstorm is one that I wanted to talk about with Chalice of the Void. Because somebody on Twitter or in the chat on my Twitch stream on Friday, basically said they didn't know about the Flusterstorm interaction, which is basically Flusterstorm has Storm. Shocker. But so basically, Flusterstorm goes through a Chalice of the Void because the copies that Flusterstorm makes, because even if you just cast Flusterstorm, one spell is cast, so it makes 1 copy. The copy was not cast; it was just put into play, basically. So that copy will you can choose new targets for that copy, and so that piece of Flusterstorm goes through. And so do any other copies of Flusterstorm. So if, let's say, 3 spells have been cast that turn, then you'll still have, 3 other copies going through the Chalice of the Void.
Yep.
So
this slot used to be Swan Song a long time ago, but when I started playing Chalice of the Void, I had to switch it to Flusterstorm because I can't play a counter spell that gets countered by my own Chalice.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, this one still technically gets countered, but it pushes it finds a way.
Yeah.
2 of Grafdigger's Cage, which is great against Reanimator. Basically, makes it very hard for them to do anything. Also, I found it works pretty good against elves as well because of Craterhoof, and they also often will find their Reclamation Sages to blow up chalices or Aether Vials. So that's also another good way to, maybe not shut them down, but again, just slow them down enough to play at our speed.
Yep. Cage is important in the Elves matchup, but doesn't really change the matchup percentage by that much. Like, it's a very bad matchup. You're probably still going to lose. It just makes it so maybe you have a chance. And we'll take that.
And again, it's about slowing him down. It's not about locking him out. It's about just slowing him down and hopefully, being able to get past. 2 of Relic of Progenitus. This is just such a great Magic card. This is in the sideboard for modern Merfolk, and I don't see why you would never run it. I mean, this was kind of, I think, more important when Deathrite Shaman was in the format, mostly because you could get rid of their extra mana sources.
It's very hard to shut down a Deathrite Shaman with Relic of Progenitus, but the big thing is that it doesn't lose you value along the way. Like, you get to draw the card. There's a cantrip. So you get to like hamper the Deathrite Shaman and still draw a card off of it eventually. So it's really good against the grindy decks, whereas Ravagur's Cage is not so good against the grindy decks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like you said, you can kind of grind them out for a while, but then you get to draw an extra card. Again, also against Reanimator, just kind of clears their yard, which is great at instant speed. So, hey, I'm all about it.
It's also good against Storm because they rely on the graveyard a decent chunk. The game plan against the unfair decks is actually not to slow them down, really. It actually is to lock them out by throwing so many headaches at the face that they just can't handle it. And my sideboard is full of a lot of headaches,
which is good. That's what we want. The next one is Sorcerer's Spyglass. This is something that I really locked onto very early. And I obviously see that you're running 2 of as well.
Oh yes.
I mean,
Spyglass is great. It's good against lands because it can name Thespian Stage, so you don't just die on the spot very very early, and it's fairly important against Death and Taxes. Most of the time, you want to name Soul of Fire and Ice because that is the scariest card in the matchup.
Yeah, it's also good against Show and Tell, Sneak and Show, not Show and Tell.
Yeah, good against the Sneak Side.
Yeah,
Sneak Attack side. It's also like not bad against the new Sculptor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and even I mean, I think that those are kind of the more important ones. But even Death and Taxes, I think this is kind of okay against, right?
It's very, very good against Death and Taxes. You need to shut down some of the stuff that Death and Taxes does. They're still gonna do a lot of stuff you can't shut down, but if you have a Vial and they have a Vial, and you also have a Sorcerer's Spyglass, you probably should play Sorcerer's Spyglass naming Ether Vial because their Vial is so much better than our Vial. You'd rather just have the game not involve Vial.
If you can, for sure. Next up, in the last card, one that I've found to be really good in Modern because of the rise of blue-white control, is Venser Shaper Savant. Now, this card costs 4 mana, so I mean, this is kind of a hard sell, in Legacy. What are we doing with a 4 mana card in our sideboard, Tux?
Generally not casting it. Sometimes casting it against the grindier decks, but generally not casting it. Venser Shaper Savant is a meta call against Sneak and Show. If I'm getting kind of sick of losing to Sneak and Show and feeling like I don't have enough stuff to bring in that matchup, Venser is the card I put in my sideboard. It has applications elsewhere, but the reason why I put it in my sideboard instead of other things is because of Sneak and Show. Because I can put it in off of their Show and Tell and bounce whatever nonsense that they're gonna put in off of their Show and Tell. If it's Emrakul, it just bounces it back to the hand. Nothing happens. They have to find another enabler, another cheat effect. If it's Griselbrand, they can draw 7, but they're probably going to die in the process because I'm playing a fairly aggressive deck.
Yeah.
You can't afford to just draw 7 like that, generally. They're just going to lose to what's already on the table.
I've also found
and if it's Omniscience, if they're not playing Cutting Wish, then it bounces the Omniscience back, and they have to find some other way to get back into play.
Yeah, and I've also found it fairly strong against Reanimator as well, because they often don't have enough mana to pay for the cost of their creatures. So when they put it when they're Elesh Norn, and you're just no, that's a great feeling because then they don't have 7 mana or 6 mana just
all the
casually sitting
right
around.
colors when it comes to Elishnorn.
Or Chancellor of the Annex. It's one of those things that they just, they cannot play it. They physically just cannot.
Yep.
So real quick,
And the Reanimate matchup, because it's a unfair matchup where we give a lot of headaches to them, it actually goes pretty long in the post board games. And that lets us buy the time to actually make full land drops to actually cast the Vensa, like, for reals.
all right. So real quick before we go, I wanted to quickly discuss some of the top decks in Legacy and just kind of where Merfolk kind of sits with them. I pulled my data here from MTG Top 8, which is a website that both myself and Matt use a lot of the times when we're just kind of looking at tournament results, MTGO results. It's a pretty quick website that kind of has some really good metadata. I mean, do you use MTG Top 8 at all, Tux, or do you go with the MTG Goldfish?
Top 8. I generally don't like Goldfish as much. Top 8 generally has just more data overall. Some of the data that it uses is not particularly good because there's some like locals that are a little bit sketchy in terms of like the relevance. But it has like a better spread of like what actually exists in the format. Whereas Goldfish only has like the top 12, which misses a lot of what you are not that unlikely to play against.
Yeah, I mean, because especially at like a LGS, like if you're playing, I mean, my LGS only plays Legacy twice a week, or sorry, every other week, not twice a week. That would be awesome. I would be at my LGS way more often if they played Legacy twice a week. But like my Legacy FNM is only once every other week, and so most people don't have multiple Legacy decks laying around. They have the one, and so when that data is factored into these, that can kind of skew data a little bit. But like you said, a lot of times when people are getting into Legacy, they're gonna get in with like Soldier Stompy, with like how I got into Legacy, or like a cheaper deck, or maybe like a modern deck that they've added a few extra things. And so it's one of those things that you want to know what you're likely to play against. So we've got, they break it down into 3 groups, aggro, control, and combo. So we're going to go down here. We'll just talk about the top 3 or so. In aggro, we have Death and Taxes at 8%, Death Shadow at 7%, and Eldrazi aggro at 5% of the meta. What do you think about these 3 matchups?
Well, Death and Taxes is just atrocious. I have been winning a decent chunk against them, but mostly on the back of the other my opponent not really knowing what's important in the matchup. So if it's well piloted, there's very little chance of winning.
Yeah, and Death and Taxes, I think part of the reason it's so popular right now is it just got a reprint of Rishadenport, which was kind of
a lot of its cards got reprinted recently. And it's a fairly like cheap deck. It's actually cheaper than Merfolk, I think. Because they don't play chalices, and that's a huge part of Merfolk's cost.
Yes, definitely.
Like, most of Death and Taxes is actually modern legal. The same as modern, but even more so. Or like was printed in a modern like set.
And Death Shadow is kind of basically just almost a straight port of the modern version.
It's a little different.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I mean,
you
it's
have
almost...
to respect Wasteland a lot more in Legacy, so it's only 2 colors instead of all of the colors.
And Eldrazi aggro is kind of a beat stick in the format, just because of the soul lands. You have on top of just Eldrazi Temple, you have.
So this is slightly inaccurate in that Eldrazi, they're probably still labeling it Eldrazi aggro, but the current versions of the deck is actually a Cloud Post deck. Is a bigger version. Like, they don't play the really, really small Eldrazi like Mimic, and they just try and go bigger.
And the cloud
That
post
matchup is actually quite a bit tougher than the older aggro list.
and the cloud post lands, if I remember correctly, they kind of stack on top of each other. So it's like however many of them you have, because they're locust lands, right? So like however many of them you have, they tap for that many
Yep.
colorless mana. Yeah. So basically, it's soul lands, but like cranked up to 11.
Oh yeah. This is a matchup where like you need back to basics very much. Um, you don't need it necessarily super much as long as like you need either back to basics to like lock them out of the game mostly, or true name nemesis so that like the creatures don't really have evasion, and true name just stonewall entire Eldrazi board by itself.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. Now now correct me if I'm wrong here. Does Sorcerer's Spyglass cut those off? No, because they're a mana ability, right?
It does not cut them off, but it is very relevant in the deck. Social Spyglass cuts off Eye of Ugin itself, like them searching out stuff
Mm.
with it, and also cuts off Ugin the Spirit Dragon, which is one of the few ways that they can just like end the game on you.
Overextend on you.
Like they play out all their stuff, and you played out all your stuff, and it's like this big old board stall, and no one can attack because if I attack, then I die to their stuff. If they attack, they die to my stuff. So no one can attack. However, they have Ugin all his dust. Ugin, if I spyglass the Ugin, then they only have all his dust to recover from that situation.
Yeah, and we'd rather have them have as few outs as possible.
Yep.
All right, maybe you'll need Air Bladder to get yourself over those Eldrazi.
That's what Copter does for me.
Yeah.
Copter's very good in that matchup. Copter allows me to, in that matchup, allows me to, even if they find the All Is Dust or Ugin, to still stay in the game. Because if I've applied just enough pressure that they're still kind of low, the Copter doesn't actually die to either Ugin or All Is Dust. So if I have like a Mutavault or like another creature, I draw another creature, then I can get in there for 3, and that might be enough damage.
Yes, that is definitely important to have a source of damage output that doesn't die to all his dust. And like you said, you have to activate it to become a creature, so there's not a lot of opportunities for them to ghost fire it. So, all right, in the control we have Grixis control, which I actually played against in my stream, and I actually had a lot of trouble with this. I didn't think I would.
Yeah. We actually should discuss one more thing in the aggro deck.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
The most important part, because Grixis Delver, it's still around. It's still a thing. You still play it against it pretty much the same way as you did before. Chalice is very good. Like both Death Shadow and Grixis Delver are fundamentally Delver decks, and should be treated as such.
Yes. I also played against the Delver deck that also ran what's the badger that becomes a 3/3?
Nimble Mongoose?
Nimble Mongoose. That's yeah.
Yeah.
That's Delver 5 through 8.
I love Rogue Delver as a deck. It's just very elegant, but it does have some major weaknesses, particularly to Chalice of the Void. Like the entire 40% of the deck is 1-drops.
Yeah, I mean the Delver itself, the Mongoose, Ponder, Preordain, Brainstorm. Yeah, it's a lot of 1-drops.
They also literally have no solutions to an onboard true name. Like it just stays. They cannot remove an onboard true name.
That's fair as well. All right, Grixis control. So we like I said, I played against this deck and I didn't think I would have as much trouble against it as I did, but it's kind of surprising how well it's doing.
Yeah, it's basically the new version of Pile. They took out they're just playing the same cards they used to, more or less. Took out Deathrite Shaman, took out Leovolds, took out Green Mana. But the Green Mana wasn't really the most important part of the deck. It was just all these just solid, Grixis colored 2-for-1s. 2-for-1. 2-for-1.
Yeah.
And those didn't go anywhere. So you actually play against this similar to how you play against Pal before. I actually think it's a pretty decent matchup. Kolaghan's Command is like the most annoying card in the deck, but everything else is totally reasonable.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things about this was like in all of my games in my last Legacy stream, they were all my losses were 1-2. So it wasn't like I was completely out of it. It was just one of those things that, you know, some of it was draw dependent. A lot of it was me interacting with chat and missing things. But I also agree. I don't think it's a deck that you will lose to automatically, but it is definitely something that you have to make sure you're careful about.
Yeah, you have to play quite tight against it, or else you'll accidentally lose when you really shouldn't. Sideboarding effectively is very important against Grish's control because there's a lot of things that you think might be good to leave in, but really aren't that good. Copter is like the big one. Copter is generally good against the grindy decks, because you want to be able to keep up with them in card selection. However, Grish's control specifically has Baleful Strix, which makes Copter look really, really silly.
Yep, unfortunately. It's such a good card. Then the next up is Blue-White X Control. I mean,
This is the new Miracles list, what people call Miracles, even though there's literally only Terminus in the lists generally nowadays.
I honestly don't think this is a bad matchup for Merfolk.
It is a very good matchup for Merfolk generally.
Yeah.
We have a lot of good tools. They can't counter most anything we do. What they can counter is often pretty important, but we just generally they're just too slow.
Yeah, and
Copter helps. Copter is amazing. It is especially amazing in this matchup because it lets us, because of the reason why I said before, well, it's good against control decks to keep up with the card selection. Chalice is amazing. Cutting off swords to plowshares makes it so we only have to play against the sweepers, which lets us control how much stuff is on the board, how safely or unsafely we can play.
Mm-hmm. And this list also can't Terminus at instant speed like it used to be able to, right?
Some lists can. They are playing more ways to Terminus instant speed. The newer lists are playing accumulated knowledge. As the main draw engine instead of Predict. Predict also does this, but accumulated knowledge is a little bit more powerful in some ways.
Okay. And the last one in this is Stoneblade, and this is a deck that you actually play. You admitted to it, so
yeah.
Cough it up. What do we need to do against Stoneblade?
Not die to Sword of Fire and Ice. That's the big one.
So keep Sword of Fire and Ice in check, and that's kind of the best way to go about it, right?
Yep.
All right.
It's still a control. It's fundamentally a control deck, a blue control deck, so we're pretty decently favored with just our usual game plan, except that they have Stoneforge Mystic. Stoneforge Mystic is the problem that you need to be concerned with. That's the critical card for the matchup.
And again, letting the
Stoneforge in return getting the SoFi, which is the headache.
Yeah, and again, letting them spend all their mana, getting into play, doing all that stuff, and then kind of just like negating their whole turn is just a great strategy.
Yeah. I think Loam and Lands, the next two, are actually a little bit more important to consider than Stoneblade are. Loam is kind of a polarizing, can go either way, depending on one specific decision that the Loam player can make. And that decision is whether they play Dark Depths combo in the Loam list. If they don't play Dark Depths combo in the Loam list, I feel pretty okay against Loam. True Name, especially if I mostly because on the back of True Name and a lot of them, the 8 True Name plan, because they have a hard time dealing with True Name Nemesis. It just sits there playing being a moat. But if they have Dark Depths, then they can play the Knight of the Reliquary, search out both halves of the combo, and just win the game. When otherwise if they didn't have that option, we're just sitting there for 10 turns.
Yeah, and just
eventually I find a way to win.
Just kind of using TNNs as a stumbling block for them.
Yeah.
And Lands is just kind of a deck that you just need a sideboard against, I think, is kind of the best plan.
Yeah, the sideboard's very, very, very geared towards lands. The fact that I have 4 bounce effects is the most critical part, because I don't generally lose against lands when it goes super late. I lose against lands because they made Metal Age way too quickly, and I couldn't set up in time.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Matt actually is working on putting together lands, and that's basically the thing that I have is if I'm able to set up quickly enough, then usually I can just bounce it, and it's not an issue.
Yeah.
But if you can't do that, then guess what? You're getting a 2020 flyer in your face.
Yep. Yeah, Metal Age is the most important part of that matchup. If they're just sitting there dawdling with Life from the Loam, then you're probably gonna win that game. They're just not doing anything impactful on the board when they're doing just loaming every turn.
Yeah. So the last category, and we want to move through this a little quickly because we're pushing up over an hour here. Geez, it's been great to have you. Don't get me wrong. Like we're learning a lot on this, but we don't want to make people fall out of their seats. So first is show and tell. This is a pretty popular deck in Legacy. It's
especially popular when leading up to the GP, because a lot of the standard or modern specialists pick up show and tell when they are forced into playing, when they feel like they're forced into playing Legacy, because it's a pretty straightforward deck to play.
Yeah, you just find a sneak and show or show and tell. You put in a Grizzlebrand or an Emrakul, and you just kind of go to town.
Yep.
It's not a hard. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not a hard deck. It's a Legacy deck, so it's obviously not going to be like cut and dry. But it is definitely a lot of these combo decks are kind of instant win decks. If they have the cards in hand, then they just win.
Particularly show and tell is a deck that can afford to ignore a lot of the meta, whereas the other combo decks can't do that as nearly as much.
So next we have Storm on this list. And again, this is one that, if it's allowed to set up properly, then it kind of just wins. But an early
Chalice...
Chalice...
is that we just throw too many headaches at the Storm player. Chalice is a giant headache. Coast Catcher is a headache. The hate artifacts are headaches. We have Flusterstorms on the board, Force of Wills. Venser is actually an important thing to bring in against Storm. There's a specific trick that if you bounce a land in response to the Infernal Tutor, then that's effectively countering the Infernal Tutor.
Yeah, I actually hadn't thought about that. That's actually a really good way to cut them off of being able to actually cast whatever they get off of it. We also have Sorcerer's Spyglass, which is also really good against that. Sorry, not Sorcerer's Spyglass.
Spyglass actually doesn't do much of anything against Storm. Because LED and Lotus Petals are mana abilities, and Spyglass does not touch mana ability.
Okay, and so that's kind of why you would also be okay with, once you know that you're playing against Storm, is casting a Chalice of the Void for 0.
If it's turn 1, then I do cast Chalice for 0. I try to, if I feel like I can afford to wait on the Chalice, I want to, because Chalice for 1 is significantly better than Chalice for 0. But they have Thought Seizes and Duresses, so you can't really afford to not play the Chalice. Because I'd rather have the Chalice on the table and a Coast Catcher on the table, or Chalice and a Vial on the table, and let them look at my hand and be forced to take a Force of Will, then not play the Chalice, have the Force and the Chalice in my hand, and feeling like I have to force that discard spell because I want to play the Chalice next turn.
Ah, okay. Yeah, no, that's definitely solid.
Or if I don't have the Force of Will, I really want to play the Chalice so that when they do duress me, they just hit a Copter or something, or just even nothing.
Yeah, and we'd rather even them take a Lord than a piece that could shut them out.
Yes. Lord's actually not that good in the matchup because it doesn't actually affect their plan. It's solid. You need a clock. You can't just sit around doing nothing all game. You still need to put a clock on them, but you don't need to rush.
Yeah, you're trying to you're trying to shut them off at a key moment. You're not. You do want to keep, like you said, you want to keep presenting trouble, but you don't want to completely disregard the fact that they could just win on the spot. And that's why Chalice and Force are kind of, and Flusterstorm are kind of the most important cards against Storm.
Yep.
All right, and then Reanimator. There's also Dark Depths and Elves in this, which we've kind of talked about earlier. But Reanimator is pretty straightforward as well. I mean, in the you bring in your Relic of Progenitus, you bring in your Grafdigger's Cage, and I mean that's pretty much what you can do, right?
You also bring in the Flusterstorm, because that does counter 8 of the 12 reanimation spells.
Yeah. Yep.
It also counters like Faithless Looting or Entomb if you want to fight that half, which is often correct to do.
Yeah, being proactive is definitely important. You just don't want them to have any chance to set up. And again, that's kind of the recurring theme of Merfolk and Legacy. You don't want people to be able to get set up.
Yeah, well, Reanimator specifically, like, you should not, like, if you actually end up like getting to turn 2, then you're way massively favored. The danger of Reanimator is just flat losing on turn 1 because they have a Gristlebrand play and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah. And what's funny was in the game, actually, Reanimator was another one of the matches that I played. He revealed Chancellor of the Annex, and then I played Cavern of the Souls and played Curse Catcher, and he just conceded.
Yeah.
And it's
yeah, that happens sometimes. Yeah, that's a big reason. Like the Reanimator matchup is pretty good for us, because we have Curse Catchers to slow them down. But the big secret, not so secret tech is Phantasmal Image.
Yep.
They have really big fatties that they're trying to put into play. We have Phantasmal Image to, and our fatty version of the fatty is better than their version of the fatty.
Yeah, exactly, because they're not expecting to have to deal with it.
No. This is also the same with Show and Tell. I have won many games against Show and Tell by voweling in a Phantasmal Image and copying Emrakul and then hitting them back with a 15/15 Annihilator 6.
Yeah, no, and there's not a lot you can do at that point. You know, you've got a, like you said, a 15/15 Annihilator 6. They're done because they're not
totally done.
Yeah, they're not waiting to have 6 lands in play to cast the Emrakul. They're just gonna cast the Emrakul.
Yep.
All right. Well, that actually covers pretty much a good chunk of the meta. I mean, obviously, when you go to your FNM, your Legacy events at your store or on MTGO, that's not all you're going to see. But I think that does a pretty good job of covering most of it.
Dark Depths is actually extremely relevant, especially in the last week at SCG whatever and Team Trios. A very preferred deck from the lands who used to play like lands a lot was a Dark Depths combo. It's actually because like in Trios you want to especially not play like that long of a game, and Depths lets you do a lot of the lands things without having to like commit to a very long game.
Yeah.
Particularly making Middle Age very fast, which wins a lot of games. Wins a lot against us. We don't have very good options against the Depths combo list. Like we can if we want to beat Depths combo, like have Harbingers and more Echoing Truths. But overall, it's a pretty tough matchup.
Mm-hmm. Or Merfolk Trickster. I mean that's only even a stopgap. That's not even like a total like you're gonna win this game.
And often it doesn't even work because they often have crop rotation for Sejiri steps. So they give the thing pro blue and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, and then you cry and lose the game and go to game 2.
Yeah. It's not like unwinnable like an unwinnable matchup because of things like Phantasmal just getting them sometimes. And sometimes they just lose to their own deck or like a well-placed Force of Will. But it is pretty rough because we don't have like my build doesn't interact with that deck in a particularly comfortable way.
Yeah. And I mean, my version runs 2 of Merfolk Tricksters, so I have a tiny bit more time, but it like you said, it's not a full on stop. You know, it's a slowdown, and hopefully you can find a way to work around it.
The main thing is that buying a ton rarely is enough against Dark Deaths because they have like the Merit Lage on turn 2, and that's way too fast for us to have like that to have like enough of a board presence to actually be representing that 1 turn lethal.
Yeah, because I mean, basically, the turn that they activate and make a Merit Lage, that's it. You have to do something that turn. All right. Well, thank you very much again, Tux, for coming on the show and dispensing your breadth of legacy knowledge. And again, I mean, you already have a legacy primer available on the Merfolk Legacy subreddit, or not the subreddit, the Discord channel. The Legacy subreddit is also a great place. The main Magic subreddit is kind of special in its own way, but I think the Legacy subreddit is pretty good about having good discussions and honestly discussing decks in comparison to one another. So that's a good place to get some information. But again, if you're interested in Legacy Merfolk, come join us on the Legacy Discord. We have lots of great chats about Legacy, and Tux is kind of the king of the castle around there. So thank you so much again for joining us, Tux. Where can we find you again?
You can find me on Twitter at _Tuxdev, and you can find me on Twitch as Tuxdev.
And you stream most Sunday mornings, is that correct?
Yes, I stream Sunday mornings now.
All right, and remember, you can reach out and talk to us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook as @FishcastMTG. I personally on Twitter am @NotCodySmith, and Matt is at MatthewCotto8, so that's where you can find him. And you can, if you have a long-form question, you can contact us at fishcastmtg@gmail.com. Our cover art was made by Teston Hunter Pruitt, and our stream and other associated art was done by @Ishton on Twitter. If you like what we're doing here, please rate and subscribe in the Apple or Google Play Podcast app, as well as find us on Patreon, patreon.com/fishcastmtg. For less than the cost of a cup of Starbucks coffee, you could help support the channel, like our new patron, Luke, who is a new patron, and you can also join us in the Patreon Discord to discuss stuff that we do for the channel. We're working on doing a little commander night for our patrons, so if you're a patron and you're not in the Discord, get in there so we can get you involved in that. So thank you again, Tuxdev, for coming by and discussing this great format with me, and we will see everybody next week.